Welcome back to another fun project, and I'm super excited to have you here today for this crochet vest. I had so much fun making it. I got to preview the Heatherly yarn from We Crochet, which I adore. This yarn is 20% merino, 80% acrylic, so it's a blended yarn. It's really squishy. I could see this being really nice for color work. Lots of garments from baby to adult. So today I'm going to be making the newborn size of this vest on camera, and that will be in this lighter butter color. This vest that I made for my son is in Agave, but I just want to take a moment to talk about sizing. When it comes to sizing, the vest on a boy tends to be less fitted than on a woman that we see in fashion. So this vest fits my son. I made it in the size 10 so he could also have some room to grow. But his clothes also fit me because I'm so thin. So sometimes you can fit into your kid's clothes. So if you have a teenage son, you might want to go into his closet and try on one of his t-shirts, see if it fits you, because if that's the case, you might be able to use this for yourself. So if you are going to make one though, for a girl or for yourself, go by the bust sizes versus the 8, 10, 12 type sizing to get the fit that you want. And if you would like it to be fitted, you will want to make sure to possibly even go down a size because it does have 2 to 3 inches of ease. So if it's fitted, you really want to go down a bust size so that you can have it be fitted. Since this is a sport weight yarn, I went with the size F 3.75 millimeter hook for the body of this vest. For the ribbing, you can go down to either an E 3.5 or I even went down to a D 3.25 crochet hook. I also want to make a little note here on ribbing. I had to redo one of my sleeves because I was watching Batman and it must have been intense. And I really tightened up my tension, so much so that I had to redo one of my arm ribbings because it was like half the size of the other. So whether you go down a hook size or not, just pay attention to how much is pulling in your sleeve. If you like the stretch of the ribbing, if you want it tighter or not, but we don't want it to do any puckering necessarily along the edges here too much. I do like it to pull in a bit underneath the arm, so I sometimes tend to crochet a bit tighter down there, but it is nice to make sure you're conscious of that and switch up the hooks if needed. You will also need a pair of scissors and a yarn needle for weaving in those ends, and a couple of stitch markers are also helpful as well. So let's go ahead and get started with the newborn size on camera of this vest, even though what I'm going to show you will be similar instructions for all the sizes. All we're doing is changing stitch counts, so follow along for the construction style of this vest. This sweater vest is going to be made by making a front piece and then the back piece, and then we'll seam those together at the shoulders and down each side underneath the arms. And then after that, we'll be working on the ribbing on the bottom, the ribbing around the arms, and the ribbing around the neck. So when we start this, we'll start by making the back of the vest. This is also worked from bottom up. So we're going to start here with just the back of the vest. You can see my seam here. We're just making a flat panel, working it from bottom up. We'll work to the point where we'll make some room for the arms, and then we'll keep working up and make a little bit of room for the neck. So we're going to get started with newborn. We're going to be chaining 40. Now for the newborn size, this Heatherly comes in 328 yards for the sport weight, which is an incredible value. I go ahead and cake my yarn because I do find it easier to work with. So if you've never done that, I highly suggest buying a cake winder in Yarn Swift. It makes it so much easier. Now this vest is really 0 to 3 month size, which I like that size because newborns tend to grow so fast. Their newborn clothes usually only last a week or two. So this is, well, at least if you have big babies like I did. So this is 0 to 3 month size, and it'll fit a baby within that range. So with my F hook, my 3.75 millimeter, I have chained 40 stitches, and we are not doing a turning chain here. We are going to work right into that very first chain from the hook, and we are going to work 40 single crochet stitches across this chain. So now that we have our setup row done, we're going to turn, and the next 4 rows, so row 1 through 4 for this, is going to be our established row pattern. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. For row 1, we are going to start. I don't like to do any chains because you really don't have to. It just adds extra bulk when you're seaming. So I'm going to single crochet into the first 2 stitches. Now, if you like, mark the first stitch in each row just to keep track of the beginning stitch and the ending stitch. That way you make sure you can keep that stitch count correct. Then we will chain 1, skip 1, single crochet. And that's our repeat across. Chain 1, skip 1, single crochet. Chain 1, skip 1, single crochet, and we'll do that all the way across for this row. And that will work out that you're single crocheting into that last stitch. And then we will turn and we are going to repeat row 1 for rows 2 and 3. So we will single crochet into the first 2 stitches. And then we will chain 1, skip 1, and single crochet in that chain space. And that's our repeat all the way across again. And then we will also do that for row 3. And now for row 4, we will turn. And we're going to start by doing a stacked single crochet. What a stacked single crochet is great for is it replaces any chain stitches and it makes the edge of this much cleaner. So what we're going to do is insert that very first stitch. Notice I haven't chained anything. Yarn over and pull up a loop. Yarn over and pull through both of the loops on the hook. So essentially we just made a single crochet stitch, but now we're going to do a stacked one. So this left bar here, we're going to insert back into that, yarn over and pull up a loop, and yarn over and pull through both of the loops on the hook. And that is a stacked single crochet, and that will be our very first stitch in this row. I like to mark it because sometimes it's easy to work down the side of it into here, which we don't work here, we stop here. So it's a great idea to mark these, and they make a really nice crisp edge. So after doing the stacked single crochet, we will then do 2 double crochet stitches into the next stitch, which is a chain space. And then we're going to skip the next stitch and do 2 double crochet stitches into the next chain space. And that's going to be our repeat across. So we will skip the next stitch and do 2 double crochet stitches into the next chain space. Work that all the way across until the last 2 stitches. So now that I'm at the last 2 stitches, I'll skip the next and do a double crochet into the last. So just 1 double crochet into this last stitch. And now I'm ready to turn. Now that's rows 1 through 4. That is our established row pattern. The next thing we will do is we will repeat rows 1 through 4 3 more times for this size. So go ahead and repeat 1 through 4 3 more times. And that will give us a total of 17 rows for this section. So now that we've done these repeats, we can go ahead and fasten off because our next step will be to make some space for those armholes. So this means we'll fasten off here, turn our work, and for any of the sizes that you are working, we are going to be skipping some stitches on the right and the left side to make space for the armholes. So I'm going to skip the first 3 stitches and then I'm going to attach my yarn to the next stitch. And now I'm going to work this in the stitch pattern until I get to the last 3 stitches. So I'll start by single crocheting in the first 2 stitches, chain 1, skip 1, single crochet, and then I'm going to repeat that across until the last 3 stitches in this row. So now that I've stopped before my last 3 stitches, this is where we are going to stop and turn. We're leaving the first 3 stitches and the last 3 stitches unworked, and I've taken the stitch count down from 40 stitches to 34 stitches. So now I'm going to turn and work rows 2, 3, and 4, continuing in the established stitch pattern. And now we're going to continue to work across these 36 stitches. We're going to do the established row repeat 2 more times. So that's 8 more rows in that established row repeat. So now that we've worked this section that will go across the shoulders, we do not fasten off, and it's time for us to turn, and we're going to make a little bit of space for the neck on the back panel here as well. That way when we do the ribbing, it will sit quite nicely around the neck. So with the wrong side facing, we are going to work the row 1 of the established stitch pattern, but only for 10 stitches, and then we're going to turn. So single crochet into the first 2 stitches, chain 1, skip 1, single crochet, chain 1, skip 1, single crochet, and I'm going to repeat that until I have 10 stitches in this row. And now I'm going to turn, and I'm going to work a few more rows in that established stitch repeat. So I'm going to work row 2 from the established stitch repeat. Just across those 10 stitches. And then I'm going to turn and work row 3 from the established repeat. And for this size, that's all the rows we're going to work for this shoulder. For other sizes, you'll work the row 4 from the established repeat. And then we're going to go ahead and fasten off this first shoulder on the back. So we can go ahead and we can fasten off this yarn. We can also leave it for seaming the shoulders together later. And now with the wrong side facing, we're going to go ahead and do the second shoulder. So what we'll want to do is we will want to skip some stitches here. We want to skip some stitches and only work the last 10 stitches. So I'm going to skip 14 stitches over from the right shoulder. And then I will join my yarn and work these last 10 stitches in the same amount of rows as the first shoulder. So I'm just working that established repeat for these 3 rows, and it will match what's over here. So now I'm going to go ahead and fasten off the yarn here, and you can go ahead and block this if you would like. The back of our sweater is now done for this size. This is the wrong side. Here is the right side. It does have a little bit of a lean in the stitch, so just taking some time to block this will make those stitches lay really nice, which means that it will fit on the body and sit exactly how we want it. So we can go ahead and set this aside, and now we're going to start the front of the vest. I want to note that the front of the vest starts the same way as the back of the vest, so this section here up until we're getting to that arm split will be exactly the same. So we'll work that up as we did on the front. Now for the front of this vest, once I've repeated the bottom part of the back, we can go ahead and fasten off. And then we're going to do a couple rows like we did on the back of the vest, where we're going to turn and skip the first 3 stitches and then attach the yarn to the next stitch. And then we're going to work in our established row repeat until we get to 3 stitches to the end. So we want to leave 3 stitches here unworked and 3 stitches here unworked. And now I'm going to turn and then work 1 more row in that established row repeat. And then we're going to start working that neckline after this row. So now that we have those 2 rows done, it's time for us to divide for the center V here. We need to make space for that front V. So I'm going to turn my work, and I'm only going to work about half the stitches. On some sizes, you'll have 2 stitches between, and some sizes it works out to be exactly half. So I'm going to single crochet in the first, single crochet in the second, chain 1, skip 1, single crochet. So I'm working in that established row pattern, but I'm only going to work this for 16 stitches for this size. So now that I've worked 16 stitches, it's time for me to turn again. And now this is where we're going to decrease. Now all the decreases will take place along the V-neck edge. We'll be decreasing by 1 stitch every single time we come to this V-neck for the next 3 rows. And then after that, we'll be decreasing on the V-neck edge every other row until our stitch count is 10 stitches. So to do this, we're going to start by doing a stack single crochet. And then I'm going to double crochet the next 2 stitches together, and that will decrease by 1. There's an example of how you would decrease on the row 4 of that pattern repeat. Now I'm going to continue the rest of the row in that pattern repeat. So 2 double crochets into the next chain stitch, skip 1, 2 double crochets into the next, and I'm going to work that all the way to the end of this row. And now that I'm working my last stitch, I want to double check this row to make sure that it did decrease by 1. So I should have a total of 15 stitches. And now we're going to turn, and remember we're going to decrease for the first 3 rows here, every row. So I'm going to turn and I'll be decreasing on the neck edge again. So I'll start this row in the established pattern. And now that I've come to the last 2 stitches, I'm going to single crochet those 2 stitches together. So we're just decreasing along that edge in a way that makes sense. And now I'm going to turn, and we're going to have to decrease again. So I'm going to single crochet 2 together and then work in the stitch pattern. So I would chain 1, skip 1, single crochet. Chain 1, skip 1, single crochet. So we're just keeping it in that stitch pattern, even though sometimes when we decrease, we have an odd number of stitches. We're just going to make it work in that stitch pattern. Now I want to make sure that I have decreased to 13 stitches. And now we'll be decreasing every other row. So we'll work this row in the stitch pattern. But since it is 13 stitches, let me show you what happens at the end of this row when I'm working it in the stitch pattern repeat. So when I get to the last stitch here, I don't want to chain, so I'm simply going to work a single crochet stitch into the last. So if you get to the end of the row and it's supposed to be a chain stitch, substitute it with a single crochet stitch to finish off that row. Now for some sizes, when you're decreasing, you're going to encounter where you're starting a row 4 repeat, where the first 2 stitches are single crochet stitches. So when this happens, the way that it works out is a bit different. We're not going to need to double crochet 2 together when the row starts with 2 single crochet stitches. So we'll do a stacked single crochet in the first stitch. And just by the way the stitch pattern works out, we're going to skip the next stitch and work 2 double crochets in the next. This stitch being skipped and then working it in pattern actually decreases by 1. And now when you get to the end of the row, I always like to check, so I should have 12 stitches in this row, which I do. So now that I've decreased to 12, the next row will simply be worked without decreasing in the established stitch pattern. And then for this next row, I'll do another decrease where I single crochet two together, and then I will chain one, skip one, and single crochet. And then I'm going to turn. Now that I'm down to 11 stitches, I'm going to turn and work the next row simply in the stitch pattern. But once again, since we have an odd number of stitches here, when we get to the end of this row, we will simply work a single crochet stitch instead of a chain. So now we're going to turn, and this will be our last decrease for the size because this will decrease down to 10 stitches. So I'm going to start with a stacked single crochet. And then I'm going to skip the next, which does the decrease for me. And then do 2 double crochets into the next. And continue the repeat for the remainder of this row, and we should have 10 stitches at the end of this row. And then for this size, we are going to finish this off by simply doing 3 more rows in the stitch pattern. So that will be 10 stitches per row, and then we'll be able to fasten off. Now that we finished the amount of rows we need, I went ahead and fastened off, and we're going to go ahead and do this other side here. Now we want to make sure that we're starting this row on the same side as we started our first row over here. So I'll have the wrong side facing, because that was the wrong side facing of the first row of this panel. And for this size, I'm going to skip 2 stitches and then join in the next. For most sizes, you won't be skipping 2 stitches in between. Some of the larger sizes we do, but for this size we do as well. So for some sizes you would be joining the next stitch over from the first panel. For this one we'll skip 2, join, and then we're going to work in our stitch pattern repeat. So simply going to work this row in pattern. This will be a total of 16 stitches to the end here. And now I'm going to turn my work. And for the next 3 rows, we will be decreasing 1 stitch along the neckline for those 3 rows. So I'm going to start in the stitch pattern repeat. So we'll be taking this from 16 stitches to 15 stitches. So here's how we're going to decrease on this side. We're going to do this side in the established stitch repeat, and we'll only decrease on the side of the neckline. So now in order to decrease when we're working these double crochet stitches, instead of working 2 in this last one, I'm simply going to work 1, skip 1, and double crochet into the last. And that is an easy way to do a decrease stitch for this stitch pattern. And then I'll turn. So now I'm going to turn, and we are going to single crochet these first 2 stitches together. And then we're going to work in the stitch pattern repeat. So I'll single crochet in the next, chain 1, skip 1, single crochet, chain 1, skip 1, single crochet, and we'll work that to the end here. And then we will turn. It's always good to make sure that your stitch count is decreasing the way that you want. So be sure to count at the end of each row to make sure that it's decreased by 1 for these first 3 rows. So this row I will also decrease. And then after this row, we will be decreasing every other row in the established stitch pattern until we get down to 10 stitches. So it's simply repeating the instructions we did over here. We're just decreasing along the neckline for this side, so it's almost flipped. So I'll decrease these last 2 stitches, and then the next row will be done without decreasing, and we'll do every other row decreasing, and then the last 3 rows will simply be done in the stitch pattern to match this side. So when we're working this double crochet row again, so after we worked it the first time, every time after that, our decrease has to be a little bit different. So since we're working this across an odd number of stitches, the way that this works out is we'll need to do our established pattern until the last 3 stitches, and then we're going to skip a stitch and then double crochet the last 2 stitches together. And that decreases by 1 stitch. So now we've gone from 13 stitches to 12. Now, once you worked to the same height, we can go ahead and fasten this off. And then the next steps will be seaming. However, I like to recommend blocking before seaming because these do have some leans to them with the way the stitches are worked. So I want to show you how I like to block these. So I love these blocking mats for the lines because then it makes it really easy to see where your edges need to be. And as you can see, not a lot of these lines are matching up currently. So what I will do is I will take some blocking pins and I'll pin it into place, starting pretty much at any line, making it line up straight, and then working all the sides until they look more even, more straight, more clean. And then you can spray this and just let it sit. You can put a fan on it if you want to. You can let it sit overnight and dry. You can do a full wet block where this would be wet as I was placing it. That's more of an aggressive block. Or you can take a steamer and you can lightly steam it, being careful because acrylic can melt a little when it's steamed too aggressively, so you don't want to get too close to it. And you can steam it that way too. I'll probably do a light steam block on this so that I can keep on going right now. And notice how I'm going to kind of pull this edge. I'm watching how I want this to line up here and to line up here. Not changing the dimensions, but making sure that everything is looking nice and straight. And once I do that, that will make this seaming a lot easier than doing it without blocking. So I'm going to keep blocking this all the way around, and I'll do that for both pieces, and then we will come back and seam. Now that we have these blocked, seaming them will also help them stay straight and in place as well. To seam, we want the right side facing us. So even as I flip this on the back, I want the right side facing me on the back, and we'll place them together so the wrong sides will be against each other. And then we are going to get acquainted with our yarn needle, and we will be seaming the seams above the shoulders. So the 10 stitches here to the 10 stitches there on each side. And then we'll go ahead and seam just down the sides underneath the arm. So now we can seam with a whip stitch, or what I like to do is I like to just go down the center top of each stitch. And then when I come back to the other side, I'll do the same. So I'll kind of loop a strand, come right back on the edge, and then go right down the center of that first stitch. And now I'll just simply go back and forth between these, going through those stitches. So down the center, and I'm talking about the V on the top, will come right out that center. And it really does a nice invisible seam. You can see they're matching up quite nicely. So I'll finish this across for here, and then I'll go ahead and do it for this side as well. And I can weave in any extra strands I have too. And now for the sides, I kind of like to turn my vest, kind of folding it as if it was folding the other way. And then I'm going to seam from each underarm stitch. So I'm not adding any extra stitches. I'm just simply going to whip stitch down the side of this, turn it a little here so that every single row lines up. You just want to be conscious that you're lining up the rows so that the pattern stays consistent, and you're simply just going to seam back and forth going down the side of this vest. And we'll do that for each side, and notice it leaves a nice armhole. Now that we have this seamed, it's time to start doing some ribbing, and we'll be doing some ribbing around the bottom, the arms, and then the V-neck. I'm going to start with the bottom, and I'm going to attach my yarn at one of the sides. Now I am switching to size D, 3.25 millimeter, but I want to take a moment and talk about ribbing. I find that for most crocheters, ribbing is one of the most difficult things to match gauge, simply because it's working back and forth in rows. It can get tight or loose. It's honestly hard to keep the right tension all the time, and it is difficult to match somebody else's tension. So this is what I say about this. Work with the hook size that works for you. If you know you have a really tight tension, consider going with the E hook. If you have a loose tension, maybe the D hook. Work a few stitches and see if it's pulling in too much or if it's too wide, and adjust accordingly. When I made my first one, the ribbing on one arm was so much tighter than the other that I had to undo it and do it again. So it even happens to me sometimes when I'm not really paying attention to my tension. Tension is going to be key on the ribbing and keeping that consistent. So I'm going to go ahead and attach my yarn at the side of this vest, and then I'm going to chain 6 for this baby size. And now I'm going to single crochet in the second chain from the hook and in the rest of the chains across. So it will be a total of 5 single crochet stitches. Next, I will slip stitch into the next 2 stitches along the bottom, and you don't want to do these too tightly. You don't want these slip stitches to change the flexibility of the bottom, so don't make them so tight that it's causing any type of puckering. Then I'm going to rotate, skip the 2 slip stitches on the body, and then in the back loop only, single crochet the 5 stitches across. Now I want to note on the 5th stitch, the edge stitch on the bottom, if you want it to be a little bit cleaner, you can single crochet through both loops on the edge stitch. Now I'm going to turn, chain 1, and once again I am going to single crochet through both loops on the 1st stitch, and then the rest of them can be worked in the back loop only. And then we will slip stitch 2 stitches from the body. And then turn our work. If you're working quite a large vest, this one rotates pretty easy because it's so small, but you can always place this inside of a small shallow bowl. And that way, when you're watching TV and it's sitting on your lap, you can rotate it quite easily by rotating the bowl, so you don't have to like pick up and kind of move your whole piece. So I'm going to skip the 2 slip stitches from the body, single crochet in the back loop only for the 5 stitches, or if you like, as I've been doing in that very last stitch to keep a straighter, cleaner edge, you can single crochet through both loops. And you're just going to keep repeating those 2 rows over and over all the way around. We can already see it starting to create some ribbing here. So we'll do it all the way around and then come on back and I'll show you how to join your last edge with your first row. So now that I've worked all this ribbing all the way around the bottom of this vest, it's time for me to join. And I found a cleaner join when I'm working like this is to actually place these together and work it from the wrong side, so more from the inside. So what I will do is I will chain 1, maybe, and then I'm going to start by placing my hook through the first loop from my first side, and then through both loops of my first stitch, and slip stitch those together. And then I'm going to go through the first loop of my very first row, and then through the back loop only of my current row. And I'm going to repeat that for the remaining stitches. So I'm going to go through the loop of my first row, and then right in here, the back loop only of my current row. And then once you have worked that all the way down your stitches, you can go ahead and fasten off, and then we can weave in those ends, and it's a nice join that's very invisible. And now we can work on the ribbing for the other parts. So I've already done this arm so you can see where we're going here. And I want to show you how to do it on this side. So I like to join on the side underneath the arm. That way it's even less noticeable, even though you can't really see the seam. It's always good to place seams in the less noticeable areas. So we're going to be doing it just like we did down here for the bottom ribbing, only less stitches so that it's not so wide for this top. So I'm going to join my yarn under the arm. And now I'm going to chain 4. And then I will single crochet in the second chain from the hook and across. So that will be 3 single crochet stitches. Now I will be working these 3 stitches the exact same way that we had worked around the bottom for the ribbing. So slip stitching from the edge, turning, skipping those 2 slip stitches, and I do 2 stitches in the back loop only. And then to keep consistent, I will single crochet through both loops on the end here. So the only difference when doing this arm ribbing is that when you get to this area where we're working up the side of our crochet piece, we don't have defined stitches to tell us where to enter our hook. So the best way to do this is about 1 stitch per single crochet edge. So the rows where we're doing the single crochet stitches, and 2 stitches per double crochet edge. So that means that, in the corners, you don't have to worry about working any extra stitches in those. By simply just working them as is, it brings it together and helps that arm be a bit more shaped. So I'm going to be slip stitching 1 stitch per edge when it comes to the single crochet stitches, and 2 stitches along the double crochet stitches. And then it's worked exactly the same way as we did with the bottom ribbing, including the join at the very end. So I'm going to go ahead and let you work on this part, and then we will come back for the front V. Now we're going to be working the ribbing around this neckline. We'll be working it all around this opening, and we're going to start by attaching our yarn at the very bottom point of that V. Now I have 2 stitches here that are kind of like in between stitches for this size, so I'm just going to attach to that left one. Then I'm going to chain 4 for this size. You'll chain a different amount for other sizes. And then I'm going to single crochet into each chain across, starting from the second chain from the hook. So we're doing the exact same thing we did on the arms here. We're just working it in different spots. So now you'll notice once I complete this first row of 3 stitches, what we will do is we will leave this here. We'll stitch it down later. We'll kind of tack it down later with our yarn needle. So we'll just leave our tail hanging out. And now we're going to slip stitch 2 stitches from the sweater body along the neckline. You'll use the same method as we did on here, slip stitching about 2 stitches per double crochet row and 1 stitch per single crochet row. So I'm going to slip stitch 2. And then I'm going to turn and skip those slip stitches, and working in the back loop only, single crochet 2 stitches, and then I like to single crochet through both of the loops for that last third final stitch. And now I'm going to turn again, and then I will simply continue to repeat the ribbing that we did here, the same type of instructions, all the way around this neckline. So I'm going to work my way first up this left side, and I'll keep slip stitching along this left side of the neckline. And I'll keep working that ribbing all the way around here, around this back, and then back down to here. When we get back down to here, come on back and I'll show you how we're going to finish this off. So now that I've done this ribbing all the way around, it's time for me to go ahead and fasten off. I know we have a gap right here, but I'm going to show you how to fix that with your yarn needle.
So what you can do is you can take your tail end from when we started and you can tack this underneath here to this side on the back side. And then for this front side, I'm simply going to do like a small seam to tack this down into place. So I'm just going to take my yarn needle and just tack that down along this edge so that it just looks nice. It doesn't like flop out as much. So you just go up and down, back and forth through your piece and tack that down. And you can even use this strand and tack down this side so it looks nice and overlapped on the front. I hope you've enjoyed crocheting this fun vest. I love how it does come in many different sizes, so you can do a set if you want for siblings or a mommy and me or a daddy and me type outfit. This is really a unisex sweater. It can be worn by anyone. So it's really fun in that aspect as well. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and come back for more fun projects soon.